All right, so we talked about what an affordable car is, and it looks like $15,000 seems to be a reasonable, at least from your perspective, and I think it's actually reasonable myself, to be able to be available to the masses. Now, we also talked about the fact that infrastructure is kind of forcing the electric car owners to be maybe of a higher income, at least for now, but it is building out. But okay, so the next question, if the goal is the $15,000 car, which manufacturer do you think will come up with one, or two or three manufacturers, and when do you think it's going to happen?
So I'm actually the most hopeful for Volkswagen. They have their ID3, and it still is too expensive. I think it's what, 24? But at the same time, I sort of believe in VW's ability to manufacture at volume. So they're sort of the one that I'm looking at to create that mass market car. And it's not going to be this generation, but I'm hopeful for the next. So
I
I guess
do
a
think it's
year.
closer to 30, actually. I know they haven't officially priced it, but the thing is, it's kind of a gray area right now. I've heard 30, and I've heard like 26. You might have heard 24. But even so, but that can kind of get us relatively close with some of the incentives in Europe. Okay, so why do you think Volkswagen?
Just because they have the strong manufacturing prowess, like they just have like a good background. And I feel more so than, say, Mercedes, who just makes high end premium cars. They have smart, but this is a totally different thing, and they're not actually manufacturing it themselves. Porsche, also super high end. And if we start to look at, yeah, some of the affordable cars that we've seen that we actually just talked about in the previous video, so maybe the Zoe or the Nissan Leaf. Yeah, these are good, but I just don't see them hitting the same volumes that Volkswagen can. There is a brand that I'm hopeful, and it's Seat. I know they're mostly focused into Europe, but they seem to have a really forward-thinking future of mobility idea that, um, yeah, like they
Is
have the.
that remind me who owns them? Is that the Volkswagen Group owned one? Um, I might yeah I'll check on that. But okay, interesting. Now Volkswagen Group, I have done videos before where I talk who's Tesla's biggest competition, and you're probably right because of how much money they have and the manufacturing process, and of course they have other brands that contribute to research and development like Audi and Porsche and even Lamborghini in some ways. That it's a big effort. So you think that they will get to the $15,000 car first? Well, okay, what about Kia? I mean, Kia and Hyundai. I mean, they're kind of sister brands, but they've been kicking some butt. What do you think about them?
Actually, that's true. I've been spending a little more time with Hyundai, but I just feel like the range isn't there.
Well, if anything, actually, the range. Oops. If anything, the range is um, above EPA. So let's see
Oh.
and I've experienced it myself. So when I went to Santa Cruz, that's where they had their big test drive and kind of a launch event for journalists here in the U.S. I remember flooring the hell out of this car. I mean, I was actually test driving it with Fred, who is the editor in chief of Electrek, and he was like abusing the hell out of this car. And even with that, we came up with altogether, I think, 239-mile range. But I have a group a Facebook group for Kia Niro EV owners, and a lot of them reporting over 300-mile range, just which is like insane. And then you're just talking about Hyundai, their range is also about 270 to 80. So they actually figured it out. So I'm wondering if they can like scale it back down to maybe 150, 180-mile range and get to $15,000 price range. What do you think about that?
That's actually super interesting. The last time I drove a Hyundai, the range just went, and I was freaking out the entire time. So I just, for me, I just don't really trust it. But I guess if like, but it has been maybe 2 years since I've done any sort of test drive with them. So if what you're saying is right, and I 100% believe you, then yeah. Yeah, maybe they are the most interesting ones.
Yeah, well, the problem with them, I don't know if you know Tom Malogny, who is a contributor to Inside EVs. Also has a regular segment on my channel. He recently called them compliance cars, both Hyundai and Kia. Because, and I was kind of surprised. I was like, Tom, what do you mean? Like they have amazing range. They're 35,000 kind of a starting point. You're very competitive compact SUVs. That's what Americans want. But the thing is, they're not selling them, especially in the U.S. Because of they haven't figured out the battery supply chain yet. As a matter of fact, I just checked. There's less than 500 units sold of Hyundai Kona EV in the U.S. this year. I can
That's
sell more of them out of my
crazy.
garage because they're actually very good cars. So even though the cars are good, they they're not really that interested in selling them. I just went to also a Western Automotive Journalist event in Monterey where they bring all these cars for us to drive. You know how that goes. And
Yeah.
guess which car Hyundai and Kia did not bring? You, right. So I don't think they're really that interested in selling them. So I will go with your original gut feeling with the Volkswagen Group because at least they're putting their money where their mouth is and trying to sell them.
Yeah, and you are right. It is in the ID3 should be in the low 30s. I think I heard 33. So it's still high, but it's in that affordable premium category. But I just really think that they're the ones who are going to kind of nail it and kind of be able to bring it down for like mass volumes. I like they're the ones I have the most faith in.
Now, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, there's also Indian and Chinese market. Now, China is still
Yes.
pretty well off, but I know some companies are just trying to make their way into India, and that's where the income just completely falls. And I think the average car price there, new car price is like $6,000. But okay, so that's interesting. But let's talk about, all right, let's say Volkswagen produces a $15,000 car. What is the minimum acceptable like specs of that car that people will actually say, all right, I got $50,000, and instead of going with a, I don't know, Toyota Corolla, whatever they're selling for $15,000 right now, I'm gonna go with this car. What are the minimum specs?
I think it has to have at least 250 miles.
Wow.
I still think it has to have real range. And I think that this is for the average person who is moving from the petrol head concept, right? Who doesn't feel comfortable with EV, hasn't owned one before. I still think it needs to have that kind of big range.
You
And
know,
yeah, I don't know.
no, no, I'm actually thinking because at first I was like, well, is she insane? What do you mean? I'm 15. But actually, no, no, you're actually right because people who will be buying a $15,000 car, so that will probably be their first EV, where like us, right? Who like I've driven a V all the time. We know 100-mile range even a day is like, and I'm gonna charge it overnight, so no big deal. But somebody who's new, you're absolutely right. They want a lot. They want triple of what they can possibly drive in one day.
Yeah.
Um,
They
that is a
they
problem.
won't need it. They won't need
They
it.
won't need it.
100%. 100% they won't need it. But for them to make that purchase, for us to go sort of mainstream and see that kind of mass adoption that I really want in the market, it has to be the big range.
I hate that you're right about this, but you're right about this because that's gonna only because I was my next question to you was gonna be like, all right, well, what if Kona or or Nero, if we cut that range in half by to 150, which I think is acceptable, we can cut the price in half and then voila, right? But you're right, actually, the price needs to go down, but the range needs to stay.
Stay high. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, so okay, so the next question is obviously when do you think is going to happen and what do you think has to happen to battery technology and a charging infrastructure in order for it to actually, be reality one day?
So for me, there's a few things that would need to come into play that won't drive the price down. It'll drive the price up. I think that we need self-driving technology to get to a point where the car can charge itself and park itself, right? Parking, self-parking is already something that we've been seeing in cars for what, almost 10 years, right?
People
That
don't
cars
know
can
that.
park
But yes,
themselves.
that's right. Even a Prius had a self-parking feature like 8 or 9 years ago. You're absolutely right.
So self-parking is something that is super common and really sort of built out, and what I feel is one of the more stable self-driving technologies out there. I mean, I don't want it to drive around a road. I don't want it to drive around anywhere. I just want it to drive around a geo-fenced parking lot, meaning that the car knows its environment already. It's been mapped, and it can kind of like pull itself in and out. But this type of technology, yeah, it's a little bit more expensive, so that's not going to drive price down. But then again, if the charging infrastructure is going to get there, that's what we sort of need to see. We need to see in urban centers people having mass adoption, and the cars kind of take care of that charging, addressing that infrastructure problem that we talked about in the first video. So I think that that needs to be one of the things. And I think that we need to definitely address the battery supply chain. I think that companies right now are working to create a vertical, right, where they own the materials so that they can sort of meter and plan how many batteries they're able to produce. And I think that we're probably 3 to 4 years away from that being a real reality, just with all the plants going online and companies having to figure out how to create that volume quite safely. I mean, I was genuinely shocked that the e-tron had water in the battery when it was first released in the US. I mean, I didn't think that Audi would make that kind of mistake. So even for the premium guys, I think that the battery supply chain is a real issue. So I don't think it's that far off.
Yeah, though I think that's a battery module fault rather than a battery itself, because I think the water was in the module itself. Though I do have to give him some credit, because unlike Tesla, NIO, maybe even Hyundai was something that happened the other day, they did catch it before it caught on fire and did a recall. So kudos to them for not screwing it all for for everybody else. But to your point, once again, I think you're onto something, because we have Electrify America here, the Volkswagen Group subsidiary that they pretty much had to invest $2 billion as a punishment for Dieselgate. They have this project that they call Envoy, and they put the charging stations on a couple of Volkswagen e-Golfs, kind of a car share type of a situation in a low income apartment complexes. So people can either go and pay per hour or whatever, go get groceries, or they can do Lyft or Uber, and that gets them a little bit used to the electric cars, and maybe once in another 2, 3, 4, 5 years, when we do have $15,000 electric cars, they would actually transition relatively seamlessly. So to your point, there's already something that's being done about it, and that's a very interesting point there.
So actually, one of the really cool things that just happened in Berlin is that Volkswagen launched WeShare, which is a all-electric car sharing fleet. So they put 15,000 cars on the road, which makes them one of the largest, if not the largest, electric car sharing service in Europe, if I'm not mistaken.
In the world, probably, because here it's right here in Sacramento where we have the largest fleet, electric car share fleet in Sacramento, and it's 260 bolts. So if they have 15,000, they win in the world. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things that I think that a lot of people in the US aren't really aware of is that in Germany and a lot of European countries, they didn't embrace Uber, right? And the taxi conglomerates were so strong that they were basically able to keep Uber out. And originally I thought, oh, this is crap, right? I love Uber. I love Uber so much, right? It's a big part of how I get around.
Yeah.
But the cool thing that happened is that they sort of put out these independent car sharing fleets, right? So I drive myself around Berlin all the time. I just pop into a WeShare or a Sixt or a Drive Now, and I drive myself. And so Europe actually has way more developed, like with options of types of rental and cars available than I've ever seen in Europe, or sorry, that I've ever seen in the US. Like, sure, there's car sharing in the US, but people tend to do it as like rental, like car rental replacement, not necessarily getting around the city, like an Uber replacement. So that's sort of why I also have my money on Volkswagen because their car sharing service is electric, and that's their plan, right? And I love it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. A lot of people who watch my channel, there are a lot of them that are really big Tesla fans, and just they really still, and as they should, disliked what happened with Dieselgate. I have a different view on it. I always say, hey, listen, Dieselgate was blessing in disguise that turned the car, the whole company around, and they're trying to run away from it so fast. They're actually leading the way of legacy manufacturers in electric cars. But that's a bit of a, that's some people may take a while to get over that. So, all right, well, listen, I love having these conversations with you. Obviously, we are going to wait for a little bit, but I think overall we're starting to understand what needs to happen. We see all of the improvements in infrastructure and in battery technology. So just like you said, another 3 or 4 years, and we might just see a $15,000 all electric car with 250-mile ranges. As selfish as this might be. So, all right. Well, listen, I'm so glad we had this conversation, and I'm looking forward to doing this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. It was a lot of fun.